Why do people say they want to change, but their life stays the same? It is not because they do not understand what to do. Most people already know. They know they should wake up earlier, stop delaying, control distractions, and finish what they start. The real struggle is not knowledge, it is resistance. The mind quietly creates reasons to wait, and those reasons feel logical. You call it timing, mood, or energy, but underneath it, there is a simple pattern. Excuses protect comfort. Discipline does not begin when life becomes easy. It begins when you stop negotiating with yourself. The moment you notice how often your mind postpones action, you start seeing the truth. Every delay slowly teaches your brain that intention does not matter. But every small action, even uncomfortable and imperfect, teaches the opposite. This audiobook is about understanding why excuses feel convincing and how refusing them changes not just your habits, but the way you see yourself. Chapter 1. Why the Mind Creates Excuses. Most people assume excuses are signs of laziness, yet they are often signs of protection. The mind is designed to keep a person comfortable and safe, not necessarily progressing. Whenever an action feels uncertain, difficult, or emotionally uncomfortable, the brain searches for a way to avoid it. It does not announce avoidance directly. Instead, it produces reasoning that appears sensible. A person hears thoughts like, "You are tired today," or "You can start tomorrow." These thoughts feel supportive, almost caring. In reality, they are defensive. The mind is reducing immediate tension. It chooses short-term relief over long-term improvement because relief feels safer. The person believes they made a logical decision, yet the decision was shaped by discomfort avoidance rather than clear intention. Excuses rarely appear as obvious resistance. They present themselves as planning. Someone decides they need better preparation, more information, or a different mood before beginning. Preparation is valuable when it leads to action, but excuses disguise delay as preparation. The person remains busy thinking while avoiding doing. The mind prefers thinking because thinking carries no risk of failure. Action introduces uncertainty. By staying in planning mode, they preserve the image of potential without testing it. They feel responsible without becoming responsible. The excuse protects them from discovering their real ability. Another reason excuses form is emotional prediction. The brain anticipates effort as unpleasant. Even when the task is manageable, the anticipation exaggerates difficulty. The person imagines boredom, fatigue, or frustration. This imagined discomfort feels real enough to avoid. The mind creates a justification. Now is not the right time. What they are truly avoiding is not the task, but the feeling they expect during it. Once they begin, the task is often easier than imagined. Yet the anticipation repeats daily, creating a cycle of postponement. There is also a deeper layer connected to identity. A person who doubts their capability unconsciously protects themselves from evidence. If they attempt seriously and struggle, they fear confirming their insecurity. Excuses prevent that test. By delaying action, they preserve hope. They can still believe they might succeed someday. The excuse maintains possibility without requiring effort. It feels safer to imagine success than to risk failure. The mind, therefore, produces reasons to wait until conditions appear perfect. Comfort plays a powerful role. The brain quickly adapts to familiar routines. Familiarity becomes associated with safety. Any change threatens this stability. Even positive change feels disruptive because it requires new patterns. Excuses appear to defend routine. The person remains in habits they dislike simply because those habits are known. The mind values predictability more than improvement. It chooses what is familiar rather than what is beneficial. Another subtle factor is decision fatigue. Each day contains many choices. By the time a meaningful task appears, mental energy feels reduced. The brain seeks an easy option. Avoidance requires less immediate effort than engagement. An excuse emerges naturally: "I will do it later." The person believes they postponed logically, but the decision was influenced by depleted attention rather than clear reasoning. Later rarely arrives because the same fatigue repeats. Social comparison also feeds excuses. When someone sees others performing better, they feel discouraged. Instead of acting imperfectly, they delay until they feel competitive. The mind convinces them they should start when they can do it properly. This protects pride, but prevents progress. Improvement requires imperfect beginnings, yet excuses promise a perfect start that never comes. Past experiences contribute as well. If previous attempts felt difficult or embarrassing, the brain remembers the emotion strongly. When a similar task appears, the mind recalls that discomfort and attempts to avoid repetition. It creates a logical explanation to prevent re-experiencing negative feelings. The excuse feels rational, but it is memory influencing decision. The person is reacting to yesterday's feeling instead of today's reality. Excuses often sound responsible because they include future intention. The person says they will begin next week, after a busy period, or once circumstances improve. The mind finds comfort in postponement with a promise. This promise reduces guilt temporarily. However, repeated postponement weakens belief in personal commitments. The individual begins trusting their intentions less, not noticing how often promises to themselves are delayed. Another reason excuses persist is immediate reward. Avoiding effort produces instant relief. Beginning a task produces temporary strain. The brain favors immediate reward over delayed reward. Therefore, it rationalizes avoidance repeatedly. Long-term benefits cannot compete emotionally with immediate comfort unless the person recognizes the pattern consciously. The mind also confuses readiness with certainty. A person waits to feel confident before starting. Confidence rarely precedes action. It follows experience. By waiting for confidence, they delay indefinitely. The excuse appears as caution, but it is fear of beginning without guarantees. The brain wants proof of success before effort, yet proof appears only after effort. Environment strengthens excuses. Distractions are always available, offering quick pleasure and minimal effort. When a challenging task competes with easy stimulation, the mind chooses stimulation. It then creates a reason explaining the delay. The explanation feels convincing because it follows the decision rather than guiding it. The person believes they decided logically when the choice was emotional. Excuses also protect self-image temporarily. If a person never fully commits, they never fully fail. They can say they could have succeeded under better conditions. This protects pride but prevents growth. Real progress requires accepting imperfect attempts. The mind avoids this vulnerability through delay. Awareness changes everything. When someone notices excuses as protective reactions rather than rational conclusions, their influence weakens. The person sees the pattern, discomfort appears, reasoning follows, action stops. Recognizing the sequence allows interruption. They begin acting despite hesitation. The brain gradually learns the discomfort is tolerable. In the end, the mind creates excuses not to harm, but to protect. It seeks comfort and certainty, yet protection without progress becomes limitation. When a person understands this, they stop arguing with the mind and start guiding it. Each action taken despite excuses teaches the brain a new lesson. Safety exists in movement, not avoidance. Over time, the reasoning loses power, and discipline quietly begins. Chapter 2. Comfort is the enemy of progress. Comfort feels gentle and harmless. It promises rest, ease, and emotional quietness. After a long day or a difficult experience, comfort appears necessary. Yet the mind slowly begins confusing relief with direction. A person starts choosing what feels easy rather than what leads forward. Nothing seems wrong immediately. Days pass calmly, routines stay familiar, and tension remains low. But progress requires challenge, and challenge requires effort. When every decision favors comfort, movement stops quietly. The individual does not notice decline because nothing dramatic happens. They simply remain where they were. Comfort becomes attractive because it removes effort, but it also removes growth. The mind prefers certainty over improvement. Familiar routines provide predictability. A person knows how the day will unfold and what feelings will appear. New actions disturb this certainty. Learning a skill, improving discipline, or changing habits introduces unfamiliar emotions. The brain interprets unfamiliarity as risk. It therefore suggests staying with what is known. The person interprets this suggestion as wisdom when it is protection. They remain comfortable, believing they are stable, not realizing stability without movement eventually becomes stagnation. There is a subtle moment when someone considers starting something meaningful. Perhaps they think of studying, exercising, or working on a personal goal. Immediately, a small resistance appears. The task does not feel pleasant yet. The mind offers alternatives that feel easier: rest, entertainment, postponement. These options remove discomfort instantly. The person chooses them, promising to begin later. Later repeats daily. The comfort chosen repeatedly becomes a habit stronger than intention. Progress disappears not because effort was impossible, but because ease was always available. Comfort is not dangerous by itself. It becomes limiting when it dominates decision-making. Occasional rest restores energy. Constant rest reduces initiative. The difference lies in purpose. Rest after effort strengthens growth. Rest instead of effort prevents it. Many people believe they lack ability, when in reality they lack consistent discomfort. Growth requires moments where the person acts despite reluctance. Without those moments, capability never develops. There is a story of someone who wished to become physically healthier. He planned routines carefully, but waited until he felt energetic. The energy rarely appeared because comfort remained easier. One day he acted without waiting for readiness. The first attempt felt difficult, yet afterward he noticed a quiet satisfaction stronger than temporary ease. He realized comfort gave short relief, while effort gave lasting confidence. The discomfort was brief, but the effect remained. That experience changed his understanding of progress. Comfort also protects identity. A person may remain in familiar habits because those habits match how they see themselves. If they attempt something new and struggle, their identity feels threatened. The mind avoids this by encouraging safe behavior. They continue describing themselves as incapable because they never challenge that belief. Comfort preserves old identity by preventing new evidence. Another effect appears in time perception. Comfortable routines create repetition without change. Days blend together. The person feels time passing quickly, yet meaningfully unchanged. Progress requires distinction between days. Effort makes days memorable because something new occurs. Discomfort marks growth. Without it, memory records little difference, and life feels stagnant. Technology strengthens comfort. Immediate entertainment offers pleasure with no effort. When difficult tasks compete with effortless distraction, the brain chooses the easier option. Each time this happens, attention weakens. The person becomes accustomed to stimulation rather than effort. Focus shortens, patience decreases, and meaningful work feels heavier than before. Comfort becomes addictive because it provides quick reward. Comfort also weakens discipline gradually. Each avoided effort teaches the mind avoidance is acceptable. The brain learns patterns quickly. If effort is repeatedly delayed, delay becomes automatic. The person no longer decides consciously, they simply follow the established pattern. What began as a single postponement becomes a routine of postponement. Progress requires controlled discomfort. The person must act before readiness. Starting while uncertain trains resilience. Each small effort strengthens tolerance for challenge. Over time, discomfort feels normal rather than threatening. The brain adapts to effort as it once adapted to ease. What felt hard becomes manageable because familiarity replaced resistance. There is a psychological shift when someone embraces necessary discomfort. They stop waiting for perfect emotional conditions. They begin acting based on intention rather than mood. Mood still fluctuates, but behavior becomes steady. This steadiness creates confidence. They see themselves as capable of acting, regardless of feeling. Confidence grows from action, not comfort. Comfort promises peace, but often produces anxiety later. Avoided responsibilities return repeatedly to the mind. The person relaxes temporarily, yet feels tension beneath it. When effort is completed, relief becomes deeper. True relaxation follows completion, not avoidance. The difference becomes clear through experience. Another realization appears. Discomfort is temporary. The beginning of effort feels hardest. After starting, resistance decreases. The brain was reacting to anticipation more than reality. Once engaged, attention focuses and difficulty lessens. This teaches the person that fear of effort is often larger than effort itself. Gradually, the individual learns to use comfort wisely. Instead of escaping into it constantly, they earn it through action. Rest becomes recovery rather than avoidance. Leisure becomes enjoyable because it follows progress. Balance appears. Comfort supports growth instead of replacing it. In the end, comfort is the enemy of progress, only when it becomes the priority. When ease directs choices, potential remains unused. When intention directs choices, even with discomfort, growth begins. A person does not need to remove comfort entirely. They need to place it after effort, not before it. Through this shift, progress becomes natural and life regains movement. Chapter 3. Motivation is temporary, discipline is reliable. Motivation feels powerful when it appears. A person suddenly imagines a different life, feels energized, and begins planning immediately. In that moment, everything seems possible. The difficulty is not starting during motivation. The difficulty is continuing after it fades. Emotional energy rises and falls naturally. It is influenced by sleep, stress, weather, and daily events. Because motivation depends on emotion, it cannot remain constant. When someone builds their effort around motivation, their progress becomes unpredictable. They work intensely for a short time and then stop completely. This cycle creates frustration because intention remains strong while action disappears. The person believes they lack determination, when in reality they depended on a feeling that was never designed to last. Motivation inspires beginnings, but rarely sustains routine. During its presence, effort feels easy. Tasks seem interesting and worthwhile. Yet the brain cannot maintain high emotional excitement continuously. After a few days, ordinary feelings return. The same task now appears heavier than before. The individual interprets this change as loss of interest. They conclude they chose the wrong goal. Often the goal was correct, the expectation was incorrect. They expected a permanent emotional push. When the push vanished, they assumed progress should stop. Discipline corrects this misunderstanding by separating action from feeling. Discipline does not require enthusiasm. It requires decision. A disciplined person defines a behavior in advance and follows it regardless of mood. The action may feel neutral, boring, or even inconvenient, yet it occurs. Over time, the brain adapts to repetition. What once required emotional encouragement becomes automatic. The person experiences a surprising shift. They no longer ask whether they feel like working. They simply begin. The removal of daily choice simplifies life. Energy once spent deciding is used productively. There is a clear example in learning. A student studies only when inspired. During those moments, they study intensely, but long gaps follow. Knowledge remains fragmented. Another student studies briefly each day without emotional excitement. Months later, the second student understands more deeply. Consistency, not intensity, created mastery. Motivation produced activity. Discipline produced skill. Motivation focuses attention on results. A person imagines future success and feels energized by the image. Discipline focuses attention on process. The disciplined individual values daily action regardless of visible reward. Because process is controllable, stability develops. Results eventually appear as a consequence. The person becomes less anxious because progress depends on behavior they can repeat. Another effect of discipline is emotional stability. When effort relies on motivation, productivity fluctuates with mood. Good days feel productive and bad days feel like failure. Discipline removes this emotional swing. Each day includes effort, so self-evaluation becomes steady. The person measures success by consistency rather than excitement. Interestingly, motivation often follows action rather than preceding it. A person may begin a task reluctantly and discover interest after starting. Engagement generates energy. The brain responds to involvement by increasing focus. Waiting for motivation delays this effect. Starting without it often creates it. This reverses the common assumption about effort. Discipline also strengthens self-trust. Each completed action becomes evidence of reliability. The person stops doubting their ability to follow through. They no longer depend on promises to themselves. They depend on proof. This confidence expands into other areas of life because reliability is transferable. Another difference lies in resilience. When setbacks occur, motivated individuals may stop entirely because enthusiasm disappears. Disciplined individuals continue at a reduced pace, but do not abandon effort. They understand progress includes difficulty. This persistence protects long-term improvement from temporary obstacles. The mind gradually adapts to disciplined behavior. At first, resistance is strong. After repetition, resistance weakens. Familiarity replaces reluctance. The action feels normal. What once required effort becomes habit. Habit requires minimal emotional energy. The person experiences efficiency without force. Motivation can be compared to weather. It changes frequently and unpredictably. Discipline resembles a schedule. It continues regardless of conditions. A person relying on weather acts occasionally. A person following schedule acts consistently. Over years, the difference becomes significant. Discipline also reduces regret. Even if results are slow, the individual knows they participated fully. They do not wonder what might have happened if they tried. They are trying continuously. This piece is valuable because it replaces uncertainty with direction. There is also freedom within discipline. At first it appears restrictive because it removes choice. Later it becomes liberating because it removes hesitation. The person spends less time deciding and more time doing. Their attention becomes clearer. Life feels organized rather than chaotic. Eventually, motivation changes role. It becomes a welcome bonus rather than a requirement. When it appears, work feels lighter. When it disappears, work continues. The individual no longer depends on emotional conditions. Their progress becomes dependable. In the end, motivation begins journeys, but discipline completes them. Feelings inspire vision, yet behavior creates reality. By acting consistently, a person transforms intention into outcome. The future no longer depends on emotional intensity. It depends on repeated action, performed steadily over time. Chapter 4. Delaying action weakens self-trust. There is a quiet agreement a person makes with themselves each time they plan to act. When they say, "I will start tomorrow," the mind registers a commitment. It may seem small, almost unimportant, but the brain treats personal promises seriously. If the action occurs, the mind strengthens belief in personal reliability. If it does not, something subtle changes. Nothing visible breaks, yet confidence weakens slightly. Delaying action repeatedly teaches the brain that intentions are uncertain. Over time, the individual stops trusting their own plans. They still want improvement, but they no longer fully believe they will follow through. The damage is not external failure. It is internal doubt forming quietly. Many people think self-trust comes from success, but it actually comes from consistency. Success may depend on circumstances, but consistency depends on behavior. Each time a person postpones a task they know matters, they unintentionally send a message to themselves. My decisions are optional. The mind learns quickly. The next time they set a goal, resistance appears stronger. Not because the goal is harder, but because belief is weaker. They hesitate before even beginning. The hesitation is not laziness. It is uncertainty about their own reliability. There is a difference between rest and delay. Rest follows effort and restores energy. Delay replaces effort and postpones growth. When a person delays once, the mind accepts it easily. When delay becomes a habit, it forms expectation. The individual begins assuming they will not act immediately. They schedule action for later automatically. Later becomes a comfortable illusion. The task remains mentally present, creating background tension. They feel busy thinking about action while avoiding it physically. Each unkept promise to oneself accumulates. The person does not consciously notice it, yet their behavior reflects it. They stop setting meaningful goals because they anticipate disappointment. They choose smaller ambitions to protect themselves from another broken commitment. Potential decreases not from inability, but from diminished trust. The mind avoids plans it expects will not be honored. A simple example appears in daily routines. Someone decides to wake earlier, but ignores the alarm repeatedly. At first, they feel mild frustration. After many repetitions, frustration fades into acceptance. They stop expecting themselves to wake earlier at all. Their belief adjusts to their behavior. The goal disappears because the mind no longer considers it realistic. The real loss was not the early morning. It was belief in their own decision. Delaying action also increases difficulty. Tasks postponed accumulate mental weight. The longer something waits, the more intimidating it feels. The person begins associating effort with anxiety. They believe the task itself is stressful when the stress actually came from avoidance. Immediate action would have been simple. Delay created pressure. Self-trust depends on small victories. Completing minor tasks consistently strengthens confidence gradually. When someone finishes what they planned, even briefly, they experience internal stability. They know they can depend on themselves. This feeling extends into larger challenges. Confidence grows from reliability more than achievement. Another consequence of delay is mental fatigue. Constantly thinking about unfinished responsibilities consumes attention. The person feels tired without doing significant work. Their mind repeats reminders, reducing focus for other activities. By acting quickly, they remove this mental burden. Energy returns because attention is no longer divided. The mind also forms identity from behavior. If someone repeatedly delays, they begin describing themselves as unmotivated or inconsistent. These labels influence future actions. They act according to the identity they believe. By acting promptly, they change that identity gradually. They see themselves as decisive and capable. Delaying often feels harmless because consequences are not immediate. Yet the long-term effect is significant. Opportunities pass while waiting for readiness. Skills remain undeveloped while planning continues. The person later believes time moved too quickly. In reality, delay filled the time. There is an emotional effect as well. Repeated postponement creates quiet guilt. The person knows what they intended but did not do. This guilt reduces enjoyment of leisure. Even rest feels incomplete because responsibilities remain. Action removes this tension. Completion brings relief deeper than temporary comfort. Beginning quickly does not require perfection. The first step may be imperfect or small. Its value lies in confirmation. The mind learns that intention leads to movement. This lesson rebuilds confidence. Each immediate action strengthens the next. Over time, prompt action becomes habit. The person no longer debates whether to start. They simply begin. This removes internal conflict. Life feels simpler because decisions are followed by behavior. Stability replaces hesitation. Self-trust influences every area of life. Relationships, work, and personal growth all depend on reliability. When someone trusts themselves, they attempt more meaningful goals. They know effort will follow intention. Courage appears because doubt decreases. In the end, delaying action weakens self-trust, not through dramatic failure, but through repeated hesitation. Each postponed step reduces confidence slightly. Each completed step restores it. By acting promptly, a person repairs the relationship with themselves. They prove their decisions have weight. From that proof, discipline grows naturally and progress becomes steady. Chapter 5. Small actions strengthen identity. Identity often feels like something fixed, as if a person wakes up one day and simply discovers who they are. In reality, identity forms gradually through repeated behavior. The mind watches daily actions and quietly draws conclusions. When actions are inconsistent, the mind records uncertainty. When actions repeat reliably, the mind records stability. A person does not become disciplined by deciding once. They become disciplined by behaving consistently in small moments. Each completed action, no matter how minor, becomes evidence. Over time, the mind believes the evidence more than intentions. The individual stops imagining a different self and begins experiencing one. Many people attempt large changes to feel different quickly. They start ambitious plans, hoping dramatic effort will transform them immediately. When those plans collapse, discouragement appears. The mind interprets failure as proof that change is impossible. Small actions prevent this. Because they are manageable, they succeed more often. Success, repeated, creates trust. The mind begins accepting a new description: I follow through. This belief forms gradually, but becomes stable because it rests on experience. Consider the simple habit of organizing a small part of your day. At first, it appears insignificant. Yet the brain notices the pattern. Each time the action is repeated, it updates its understanding. The person begins feeling more capable of managing other responsibilities. Confidence expands beyond the original habit. The task did not create confidence directly. It created reliability, and reliability created confidence. Identity strengthens through consistency rather than intensity. A single day of effort cannot change self-perception, but many ordinary days can. When someone studies briefly every day, they begin thinking like a learner. When they exercise regularly, they begin thinking like a healthy person. The label follows behavior. The person stops waiting to feel ready because the behavior itself creates readiness. Small actions also influence emotional reactions. Someone who practices patience in minor frustrations responds calmly during larger challenges. They trust their reaction because they practiced it often. The mind associates their behavior with capability. Calmness becomes natural instead of forced. There is also a relationship between action and self-respect. Self-respect grows when a person keeps promises to themselves. Each completed commitment reinforces the belief that their decisions matter. Over time, they treat their goals more seriously because they trust their own effort. This respect is internal, not dependent on others' opinions. The brain prefers clear evidence. Grand intentions provide little evidence because they are temporary. Repeated actions provide constant evidence. The person may not notice the change daily, but eventually they see themselves differently. The new identity feels real because it matches behavior. Small actions reduce fear. Large changes appear intimidating, but manageable steps feel possible. Each completed step weakens anxiety about the next one. Confidence develops from familiarity. The individual becomes comfortable with effort itself. Another effect appears in motivation. After repeated action, starting becomes easier. The mind anticipates the behavior and offers less resistance. What once required effort becomes routine. Routine stabilizes progress because it does not depend on mood. Social perception also changes. Others observe consistent behavior and respond with trust. The person receives opportunities they once believed unavailable. External reactions reinforce internal belief. Identity becomes supported by experience and interaction. Small actions accumulate into visible change. A person who reads a few pages daily gains knowledge steadily. A person who practices a skill briefly improves noticeably over months. The results appear gradual yet significant. The individual recognizes the connection between simple habits and real improvement. There is patience in this process. The person stops expecting immediate transformation. They understand development requires repetition. This patience prevents discouragement. They continue acting because they see value in consistency itself. Identity eventually becomes self-sustaining. The person acts according to who they now believe they are. They no longer need strong willpower because behavior aligns with self-image. Actions follow belief, and belief follows actions. The transformation feels quiet. Nothing dramatic occurs in a single day, yet life changes steadily. The person feels stable rather than suddenly different. This stability is reliable because it was built gradually. In the end, small actions strengthen identity by creating proof. Each repeated behavior confirms a new self-concept. The individual learns they are shaped not by intentions alone, but by daily choices. Through consistent effort, they become the person their actions have been describing all along. Chapter 6. Emotional control builds consistency. Many people believe consistency depends on time management or strict schedules, yet it often depends more on emotional stability. A person can plan perfectly and still fail to follow through if their feelings decide their behavior. Some days they feel motivated and productive, other days discouraged and inactive. When emotions determine action, progress becomes unpredictable. Emotional control does not mean suppressing feelings. It means acting according to intention, even while emotions fluctuate. The individual still experiences reluctance, frustration, or boredom, but those feelings no longer dictate behavior. They acknowledge the emotion and continue the task. This separation between feeling and action becomes the foundation of reliable effort. Emotions naturally seek comfort. When a task feels difficult, the mind produces discomfort as a signal to stop. The person interprets this discomfort as a reason. They think the task is wrong or the timing is bad. In truth, the emotion simply reflects effort. Without awareness, they avoid the task and reinforce the habit of reacting to feelings. Emotional control changes the interpretation. Instead of viewing discomfort as a warning, they view it as a normal part of progress. The feeling loses authority because it is understood. There is a moment before beginning any meaningful work when hesitation appears. The body feels heavy, attention wanders, and thoughts suggest delay. Emotional control begins precisely here. Rather than waiting for readiness, the person starts anyway. The first minutes feel resistant, yet soon focus develops. They discover readiness often follows action rather than preceding it. This experience teaches the mind a new lesson. Emotions are temporary, but behavior can remain steady. A person without emotional control depends on mood. If they feel energized, they act. If they feel tired, they stop. This creates irregular progress. A person with emotional control recognizes that mood changes continuously. They expect fluctuation and plan behavior independent of it. They create a routine and follow it whether they feel excited or neutral. Over time, the routine becomes stronger than emotion. Another important aspect is frustration. While learning or improving, mistakes occur. Frustration naturally follows. Without control, the person quits to avoid that feeling. With control, they pause, breathe, and continue calmly. They do not eliminate frustration, they prevent it from ending effort. This persistence gradually builds resilience. Emotional reactions often exaggerate difficulty. A task may be manageable, yet the feeling makes it appear overwhelming. By acting calmly despite the feeling, the person gains clarity. They realize the problem was smaller than imagined. Repeated experience reduces fear. The mind learns that discomfort does not equal danger. There is also relief in this process. When behavior no longer depends on emotion, uncertainty decreases. The person knows they will act even on difficult days. This predictability brings peace. They trust themselves more because they are not waiting for favorable moods. Their effort becomes dependable. Emotional control improves decision-making. During strong emotions, choices tend to be impulsive. The person may abandon plans or overcommit. With awareness, they pause before reacting. They allow emotion to pass before deciding. Decisions become thoughtful rather than reactive. This stability supports long-term goals. Another change appears in how they view boredom. Previously, boredom signaled the end of effort. Now they see it as part of repetition. Many important tasks are not always exciting. Accepting boredom allows them to continue. Consistency grows because excitement is no longer required. Emotional control also protects confidence. When progress slows, discouragement appears. A person guided by emotion may quit, believing they are failing. A controlled response interprets slow progress as normal. They continue steadily. Confidence remains intact because they understand the process. There is a social effect as well. Others perceive calm behavior as reliability. A person who reacts less emotionally appears dependable. Trust increases in relationships and responsibilities. Their steadiness becomes visible externally. Over time, emotions themselves change. The tasks that once caused anxiety feel normal. The mind adapts to repeated exposure. What felt stressful becomes familiar. Emotional intensity decreases naturally because the situation is no longer new. The person learns that discipline is not harshness but guidance. They do not force themselves aggressively. They gently redirect attention whenever emotion pulls them away. Each redirection strengthens control. Progress becomes steady. Eventually they realize feelings are messages, not commands. Emotions inform awareness, but do not dictate behavior. By listening without obeying automatically, they maintain direction. This understanding transforms their approach to work and goals. In the end, emotional control builds consistency because it stabilizes action. When behavior follows intention rather than mood, progress continues daily. The individual becomes reliable to themselves. Through calm persistence, they achieve more than excitement alone ever allowed. Emotions often arrive suddenly and feel urgent. A person may wake with enthusiasm one morning and heaviness the next, even though circumstances remain similar. Without awareness, they interpret these feelings as instructions. They work intensely when energy is high and postpone everything when it drops. Over time, their goals depend entirely on emotional weather. Emotional control begins when they recognize feelings, describe a moment, not a decision. They allow the feeling to exist, but refuse to let it determine direction. By acting during ordinary or uncomfortable moods, they discover something surprising. The emotion changes once action begins. Movement influences feeling more than waiting for feeling influences movement. Many tasks are avoided not because they are difficult, but because they are emotionally unpleasant at the beginning. The mind anticipates boredom or effort and labels the task exhausting before it even starts. The person delays repeatedly, hoping for a better mood. A better mood rarely appears because anticipation grows heavier with time. When they finally begin despite reluctance, the task often becomes manageable. Emotional control lies in trusting experience rather than anticipation. They act first and allow emotion to follow. This reverses their previous habit of waiting indefinitely for readiness. There is also a connection between emotional control and attention. When someone reacts immediately to every feeling, their focus shifts constantly. A small distraction interrupts effort, and a small irritation stops progress. By practicing pause before reaction, they protect concentration. They notice emotion without abandoning the task. Attention remains steady even when mood fluctuates. This steadiness allows deeper work and clearer thinking. Fatigue presents another challenge. After a long day, the mind argues that rest must replace effort entirely. Sometimes rest is necessary, yet often the resistance comes from emotional discomfort rather than physical exhaustion. Emotional control means distinguishing the two. They may reduce intensity, but still act briefly. Even minimal effort maintains continuity. This small action prevents the habit of quitting during low energy and preserves momentum. Impatience frequently undermines consistency. A person expects visible improvement quickly. When results appear slowly, frustration arises. Emotional control reframes expectation. They understand development requires repetition. Instead of interpreting slow progress as failure, they see it as natural pace. This perspective removes discouragement. They continue calmly, trusting the process. Another influence is comparison. Observing others' progress may create envy or self-doubt. These emotions tempt withdrawal. Controlled response prevents reaction. They acknowledge the feeling, but return attention to their own effort. Comparison loses power when behavior remains steady regardless of emotion. Personal direction becomes more important than emotional reaction to others. Emotional control also strengthens recovery after mistakes. When errors occur, shame or disappointment appears. Without control, these feelings stop action entirely. With control, they allow reflection without stopping movement. They correct the mistake and continue. The setback becomes a lesson instead of a conclusion. There is peace in predictable behavior. When actions remain stable, the mind relaxes. The person no longer wonders whether they will act tomorrow. They expect consistency from themselves. This expectation reduces anxiety and increases confidence. Emotional stability grows from behavioral stability. Over time, the person notices emotions losing their urgency. Feelings still arise, but they no longer dominate attention. The individual becomes an observer rather than a reactor. This perspective creates mental space. They can think clearly even during discomfort. Another change appears in relationships. Emotional control improves communication. Instead of reacting impulsively, they respond thoughtfully. Conflicts decrease because reactions become measured. Stability in personal life supports stability in work and habits as well. Distractions often rely on emotional triggers. Boredom encourages entertainment, and stress encourages avoidance. By recognizing the emotional trigger, they interrupt the automatic behavior. They choose deliberate action instead of habitual escape. Focus strengthens gradually. Confidence grows from repeated calm decisions. Each time they act despite mood, they prove reliability to themselves. This proof accumulates. They trust their own discipline because they witnessed it many times. The person also learns to start quickly. They know the beginning is emotionally hardest. By acting immediately, they bypass overthinking. The mind has less time to create resistance. Momentum builds naturally once movement begins. Eventually, emotions adapt to behavior. The brain expects effort regularly and stops resisting strongly. Tasks feel normal rather than stressful. What once required control becomes comfortable. Emotional energy aligns with intention. In the end, emotional control transforms effort into routine. The individual no longer waits for perfect feelings. They move through imperfect ones calmly. Their actions remain steady across changing moods. Through this stability, consistency strengthens and progress becomes dependable. Chapter 7. Stop negotiating with yourself. There is a conversation that happens inside the mind before almost every important action. It is quiet and quick, yet powerful. A person decides to begin a task, and immediately another thought appears suggesting delay. It offers a reasonable alternative. Start later, rest first, prepare more. This internal dialogue feels harmless, but it weakens decision. Each time the person listens, action becomes optional. Negotiation replaces commitment. They believe they are thinking carefully, yet they are postponing deliberately. Discipline begins when this discussion ends. The person learns to follow the first clear decision instead of entertaining every competing thought. Negotiation feels comfortable because it avoids confrontation with effort. The mind prefers gentle reasoning over firm action. It convinces the individual they deserve a break or need a better mood. These arguments sound supportive, yet they protect avoidance. When the person accepts them repeatedly, hesitation becomes habit. The decision to act loses authority. They no longer trust their initial intention because they know it will likely be revised. Progress slows not from inability, but from continuous reconsideration. A clear example appears in daily routines. Someone plans to wake early, but when the alarm rings, the mind immediately offers alternatives. 5 more minutes becomes 10, then 30. The negotiation feels small, yet it teaches the brain that decisions are flexible. The next morning, the same conversation repeats. Soon the intention itself weakens. The problem was not waking early. The problem was allowing debate after deciding. Stopping negotiation requires recognizing its pattern. The first thought often reflects intention, while the second reflects comfort. The second thought rarely leads to growth. By acting before the second thought gains strength, the person protects commitment. They move quickly, not impulsively, but decisively. Action becomes simpler because debate is shorter. There is also emotional relief in decisiveness. Negotiation consumes attention. The person thinks about the task repeatedly without doing it. This creates mental fatigue. Once they act immediately, the tension disappears. Even difficult tasks feel lighter because they are no longer postponed. Another benefit is clarity. When decisions are followed consistently, the mind becomes calmer. It no longer questions whether action will occur. Confidence grows because behavior matches intention. The individual trusts themselves more. They see themselves as someone who follows through. Negotiation often disguises itself as preparation. A person convinces themselves they need better conditions before beginning. While preparation has value, endless preparation prevents action. The difference lies in timing. Preparation should support action, not replace it. Acting imperfectly is usually more productive than waiting perfectly. The mind also negotiates to avoid discomfort. Effort feels uncertain, and uncertainty feels risky. By debating, the person delays facing that feeling. Yet discomfort fades once action starts. The negotiation prolongs discomfort rather than preventing it. Beginning quickly shortens resistance. There is a psychological shift when negotiation stops. The individual no longer asks whether they feel ready. They accept readiness will follow movement. They treat decisions as instructions rather than suggestions. This shift simplifies behavior dramatically. Stopping negotiation strengthens identity. Each decisive action becomes evidence of reliability. The person sees themselves as disciplined because they act consistently. Self-image changes gradually, supported by repeated behavior. Another effect is improved focus. Without internal debate, attention stays on the task. Energy once spent reasoning is spent working. Productivity increases because concentration is uninterrupted. The individual also experiences less regret. Decisions acted upon quickly reduce second-guessing. Even if results are imperfect, they feel satisfied because they participated fully. Regret often comes from hesitation, not effort. Negotiation weakens habit formation. Habits require repetition. Repetition requires action at predictable times. When each action depends on discussion, routine never stabilizes. Removing negotiation allows habits to form naturally. Consistency becomes easier. The person knows what they will do and does it. Life feels organized rather than uncertain. Emotional fluctuations have less influence because behavior is predetermined. Over time, the mind adapts. The internal debate shortens because it no longer changes outcome. The brain stops arguing when it learns argument fails. Starting becomes automatic. In the end, stopping negotiation does not remove freedom. It restores direction. The individual chooses intentionally once and follows that choice repeatedly. By refusing endless internal discussion, they strengthen commitment. Decisions regain power, and discipline becomes steady rather than forced. The mind often behaves like a persuasive advisor that always favors comfort. It does not shout, it reasons quietly. When a task appears, it immediately offers an alternative that feels harmless. It suggests a better time, a different mood, or a more convenient moment. The person believes they are making a thoughtful adjustment, yet the adjustment becomes a pattern. Each acceptance weakens the authority of their own decision. Over time, they begin expecting themselves to postpone. The habit of negotiation replaces the habit of action. Progress slows not because effort is impossible, but because commitment is constantly reopened for discussion. Negotiation feels intelligent because it uses logic. The mind says the body needs rest, conditions are imperfect, or more preparation will improve results. Each explanation sounds responsible. Yet responsibility includes acting on what already matters. When reasoning consistently prevents action, it stops being helpful. The person must recognize the difference between thoughtful planning and comfortable delay. Planning leads quickly to action. Delay leads back to planning again. Awareness of this cycle becomes the first step toward breaking it. There is also a timing element. The longer a person waits after deciding, the stronger resistance becomes. Thoughts multiply, doubts appear, and alternatives expand. Immediate action interrupts this chain. Beginning quickly reduces mental interference. The person does not allow imagination to build difficulty. They rely on movement instead of analysis. This does not remove thinking entirely. It simply places thinking after starting rather than before it. Negotiation creates emotional tension. The person knows they should act, but keeps postponing. This internal conflict consumes attention. Even during leisure, unfinished tasks remain present in the background of thought. Once they act, even briefly, relief appears. The relief comes not from perfection, but from alignment between intention and behavior. This alignment strengthens peace more than avoidance ever could. Another effect of negotiation is reduced urgency. When action can always be moved to later, time feels endless. The person assumes there will always be another chance. Eventually they realize many opportunities depend on timely effort. Acting promptly respects time. It acknowledges that certain moments matter more when used immediately rather than eventually. Stopping negotiation requires a simple practice, following decisions automatically. When the person chooses a task, they begin without revisiting the choice. They treat the decision as settled. This removes emotional weight from starting. The task becomes part of routine instead of a question. Routine stabilizes behavior because it removes daily uncertainty. The mind may resist initially. It will continue offering alternatives. The person does not argue with every thought. They simply proceed. Action itself becomes the answer. Repetition teaches the brain a new expectation. The internal advisor stops persuading when persuasion no longer changes behavior. There is confidence in decisive action. Each immediate response proves reliability. The person trusts their intentions more because they see them realized. Confidence grows from consistency rather than from motivation. They rely less on feeling ready and more on acting regardless of readiness. Negotiation also interferes with habit formation. Habits depend on predictable timing. When behavior changes based on discussion, patterns cannot stabilize. By removing debate, repetition becomes regular. Regular repetition becomes habit. Habit reduces effort because the mind accepts the behavior as normal. A person who stops negotiating experiences clearer focus. Instead of thinking about whether to act, they think about how to act better. Improvement replaces hesitation. Energy shifts from decision to execution. Productivity increases naturally because attention is directed. There is also freedom in certainty. Knowing what will be done removes stress about unfinished intentions. The person feels organized internally. They do not need to motivate themselves repeatedly. They simply follow established decisions. Life becomes calmer because fewer choices require emotional evaluation. Over time, even difficult tasks lose their intimidation. The person has practiced beginning quickly so often that starting feels natural. Resistance appears weaker because the mind-learned delay is ineffective. Beginning becomes the normal response. Another benefit is reduced regret. When action occurs promptly, opportunities are used. The person no longer wonders what might have happened. They experience outcomes directly. Even mistakes become valuable because they provide information instead of speculation. Stopping negotiation changes identity. The individual begins seeing themselves as decisive. Others notice reliability as well. Trust increases because behavior is predictable. Relationships and responsibilities strengthen accordingly. In the end, refusing internal negotiation restores the power of a decision. A person does not need endless motivation or perfect conditions. They need a clear choice, followed by immediate action. By continuing this pattern daily, discipline becomes stable. The mind adapts, hesitation fades, and progress moves forward steadily without constant internal debate. Chapter 8. Habits remove the need for willpower. Many people believe strong willpower is the secret to discipline. They imagine successful individuals constantly forcing themselves to act against resistance. In reality, long-term discipline rarely depends on constant force. Willpower is limited and easily exhausted. Each difficult decision consumes attention and energy. When someone relies only on determination, they begin strongly but fade quickly. Habits solve this problem differently. A habit reduces the number of decisions required. Instead of choosing every day, the person follows a pattern already decided. Action becomes automatic. The effort shifts from forcing behavior to repeating behavior. Consistency then requires less emotional struggle. Willpower operates like a temporary resource. After a stressful day, the mind prefers ease. Decisions feel heavier and resistance stronger. If a task depends entirely on determination, it will often be delayed. A habit does not depend on momentary strength. It depends on repetition. When a behavior occurs regularly at a certain time or place, the brain begins expecting it. The expectation itself prepares attention and energy. The person does not argue internally. They simply begin because beginning has become normal. There is a clear difference between deciding and remembering. When someone says they will exercise whenever they feel ready, they rely on memory and motivation. When they exercise at a fixed time daily, they rely on habit. The first requires constant persuasion. The second requires routine. Routine removes uncertainty. The person acts not because they feel inspired, but because it is part of the day. Habits also simplify mental effort. Each choice avoided saves energy. If someone must decide every morning whether to study, the mind negotiates repeatedly. If study occurs automatically at a set hour, negotiation disappears. Attention moves directly to the task. This clarity increases productivity without increasing effort. The beginning of habit formation feels difficult because repetition is new. The brain resists unfamiliar patterns. After consistent practice, resistance decreases. Familiarity replaces effort. The same task that once felt demanding now feels ordinary. The person often wonders why it was hard before. The difficulty was not the action but the newness of it. Another benefit is stability during emotional changes. Some days feel energetic, others heavy. Habits remain steady across moods. Because behavior is routine, the person acts even when enthusiasm is absent. Progress continues despite emotional fluctuation. Willpower alone cannot provide this stability because emotions influence it strongly. Small habits are especially effective. Large changes depend heavily on motivation, while small actions repeat easily. A brief daily effort accumulates into meaningful improvement. The person does not feel overwhelmed. They experience steady advancement instead of sudden pressure. The brain accepts manageable repetition more readily than dramatic effort. Habits also improve focus. When behavior is predictable, the mind prepares in advance. Distractions lose influence because attention expects the task. Starting becomes easier, and continuation requires less concentration. The individual spends more time working and less time deciding. Environment strengthens habit formation. Placing tools where they are visible or associating tasks with specific locations reduces resistance. The brain connects place and behavior. Over time, entering that environment triggers action automatically. This reduces reliance on self-control and increases reliability. There is also a psychological change. Each repeated habit sends a message. This action belongs to my life. The person's self-image adapts. They no longer think of themselves as trying to be disciplined. They see themselves as someone who naturally follows routine. Identity shifts gradually through repetition. Habits protect progress during stress. When life becomes busy, motivation decreases, routine remains. Even small continuation prevents regression. The individual does not restart repeatedly because behavior never fully stops. Stability persists despite circumstances. Another effect is reduced anxiety. Predictable routines make days structured. The person knows what will be done and when. Uncertainty decreases. Confidence increases because actions are dependable. Planning becomes easier since behavior is consistent. Over time, habits free attention for creativity. Because routine tasks require less thought, mental energy becomes available for deeper thinking. The person can focus on improvement rather than basic execution. Growth accelerates naturally. Willpower still has a role at the beginning. It starts the habit. After repetition, the habit replaces willpower. The person no longer forces themselves continuously. They maintain direction with less effort. Discipline feels calmer because struggle decreases. In the end, habits transform discipline from effort into pattern. Instead of pushing themselves daily, the person follows established behavior. Progress becomes steady and reliable. Willpower becomes occasional support rather than constant requirement, and consistency becomes part of ordinary life. At the beginning of any new effort, a person feels they must fight themselves. Each day becomes a test of determination. They rely on strong intention to overcome hesitation. This stage feels exhausting because every action requires persuasion. The mind resists unfamiliar behavior. Habits exist to end this constant struggle. Once a behavior repeats enough times, the brain stops treating it as unusual. The action becomes part of daily expectation. The individual no longer spends energy convincing themselves. They simply proceed. The struggle fades not because they became stronger emotionally, but because the brain accepted a new normal. The brain prefers efficiency. Repeated behavior is stored as a pattern, so it can occur with minimal attention. This is why familiar routines feel easy. The person does not think about how to perform them. Habits work through this same process. When a constructive action repeats regularly, the brain categorizes it as necessary. It prepares focus automatically. What once required effort now requires only presence. The individual discovers consistency does not demand constant discipline once repetition stabilizes. There is also relief in predictability. When behavior depends on willpower, each day feels uncertain. The person wonders whether they will act or postpone. Habits remove that uncertainty. They create a clear sequence. At a certain moment, a certain action occurs. This certainty reduces mental fatigue. Instead of making many decisions, the person follows established patterns. Mental clarity improves because attention is not scattered. Another benefit is speed of starting. Beginning is often the hardest part of effort. Habits shorten this stage. The mind anticipates the task and prepares in advance. The person begins quickly without overthinking. Momentum forms earlier, and productivity increases naturally. The action feels smoother simply because hesitation decreased. Habits also influence emotional reaction. A task repeated daily stops feeling threatening. The brain recognizes it as safe. Anxiety fades because the experience is familiar. Even challenging activities become manageable through exposure. The person no longer fears starting because they have started many times before. There is a difference between forcing and following. Willpower forces behavior against resistance. Habit guides behavior with minimal resistance. The person feels less pressure because the action aligns with routine. Discipline becomes calmer. Instead of battling impulses, they direct them gently. Habits protect progress during difficult days. Motivation may drop and energy may decline, yet routine remains. Even reduced effort maintains direction. The person avoids starting over repeatedly because they never stopped completely. Continuity preserves improvement. Another change appears in planning. When habits are stable, scheduling becomes simple. The person knows certain actions will occur automatically. They can arrange other responsibilities around them. Life becomes organized because routine provides structure. Habits also strengthen patience. Because progress occurs gradually, the individual learns to trust accumulation. They stop expecting immediate transformation. Each repetition feels small but meaningful. Over time, they recognize how steady effort produces visible results. There is also freedom in automation. When essential behaviors require little thought, mental energy becomes available for creativity and learning. The person can focus on improving quality instead of remembering to begin. Routine supports exploration rather than limiting it. Socially, reliable habits create trust. Others notice consistent behavior and dependability. Opportunities appear because reliability is valuable. The individual gains confidence not from praise, but from repeated proof of consistency. Even identity changes. The person stops describing themselves as trying to improve. They see improvement already happening. Their self-image aligns with behavior. This alignment reduces doubt and increases commitment naturally. Habits reduce emotional conflict. Without them, the person debates internally about action. With them, action occurs automatically. Internal peace increases because fewer decisions create tension. The day feels simpler. Eventually, willpower becomes a starting tool rather than a daily requirement. It helps establish the pattern but does not sustain it alone. Repetition carries the effort forward. The person relies on routine instead of emotional strength. In the end, habits make discipline sustainable. They transform effort from occasional struggle into reliable behavior. By repeating constructive actions long enough, the individual frees themselves from constant self-control. Progress continues quietly because the mind learned a new pattern. It now follows naturally. Chapter 9. Responsibility creates freedom. Many people imagine responsibility as a burden that restricts freedom. They associate it with pressure, obligation, and limitation. Yet a different reality appears when responsibility is understood correctly. Responsibility does not remove freedom. It organizes it. When a person takes ownership of their actions, they stop depending on circumstances or others for direction. They begin influencing outcomes directly. Instead of reacting to life, they guide it. The weight they feared becomes stability. Without responsibility, choices feel random and consequences feel unfair. With responsibility, actions connect clearly to results. This clarity reduces confusion and creates control. Avoiding responsibility feels comfortable at first. A person can explain difficulties through bad timing, difficult people, or unfavorable conditions. These explanations protect self-image, but remove power. If circumstances alone determine results, effort seems meaningless. The individual waits for change rather than creating it. Freedom disappears quietly because action loses influence. Responsibility restores influence. By admitting their role in outcomes, they regain the ability to adjust behavior and direction. There is a moment when someone realizes they are not only experiencing their life, but participating in shaping it. This realization can feel heavy initially. Accepting responsibility means acknowledging mistakes and limits. Yet it also means acknowledging possibility. The person sees that change is not entirely dependent on external events. Their choices matter. This awareness transforms frustration into motivation. Instead of blaming, they begin planning. Responsibility clarifies priorities. When someone accepts ownership of time, they begin using it intentionally. They choose activities based on value rather than impulse. Distractions lose appeal because they interfere with goals they personally committed to. The day gains structure, not through strict rules, but through purposeful attention. Purpose creates direction, and direction feels freeing because it removes uncertainty. There is also emotional relief. Blaming others or circumstances requires constant mental explanation. The mind searches for reasons why progress has not occurred. Responsibility ends this search. The person acknowledges what they can change and focuses there. Energy once spent complaining becomes available for improvement. This shift reduces stress because effort replaces frustration. Responsibility strengthens self-respect. Each time a person accepts a consequence calmly and adjusts behavior, they demonstrate maturity to themselves. They see themselves as reliable. Confidence grows not from perfection, but from accountability. They trust their future actions because they know they will respond constructively to challenges. Another change appears in relationships. When someone takes responsibility, communication improves. They listen more carefully and react less defensively. Conflicts resolve faster because the focus moves from blame to solution. Others feel respected and respond similarly. Freedom increases in relationships because tension decreases. Responsibility also changes perception of failure. Instead of viewing failure as proof of inability, the person sees it as information. They analyze what went wrong and adjust strategy. This approach encourages learning. Without responsibility, failure feels final. With responsibility, it feels instructive. There is a practical example in personal habits. Someone who acknowledges their role in their routine stops waiting for perfect conditions. They wake earlier, prepare tasks, and remove distractions. Improvement occurs because they acted rather than hoped. The routine feels empowering because it was chosen intentionally. Responsibility protects long-term freedom. Short-term avoidance often leads to larger restrictions later. Ignored duties accumulate and create pressure. Addressed duties create space. By completing tasks promptly, the person frees time and attention for meaningful activities. Discipline produces relaxation, not the opposite. Another benefit is decision confidence. Knowing they will handle consequences, the person chooses more carefully. They think beyond immediate comfort. Decisions align with values. This alignment reduces regret because actions were deliberate. Responsibility also fosters independence. The individual depends less on approval or favorable circumstances. They know their effort matters, regardless of external opinion. This independence strengthens resilience during difficulty. Over time, responsibility becomes natural. The person no longer views it as effort, but as part of living intentionally. They accept challenges calmly because they trust their response. Life feels less chaotic because reactions are controlled. Freedom then appears differently. It is no longer absence of obligation but presence of direction. The person chooses commitments aligned with their goals. These commitments guide behavior rather than restrict it. Structure provides space for creativity and peace. In the end, responsibility creates freedom by connecting action to outcome. The individual stops feeling controlled by events and begins influencing them. Through ownership, they gain clarity, stability, and confidence. What once seemed heavy becomes supportive, and life becomes guided rather than accidental. At first glance, responsibility appears restrictive because it asks a person to commit. Commitment means certain choices are no longer available, and the mind interprets this as loss. Yet the opposite often occurs. Without commitment, every option remains open and nothing becomes stable. The person drifts between possibilities without direction. When they accept responsibility for a chosen path, uncertainty decreases. They know where their attention belongs. This certainty reduces mental noise. Instead of worrying about endless alternatives, they focus on purposeful action. Freedom grows not from having every option, but from knowing which option truly matters. Many frustrations come from expecting life to change, while personal habits remain unchanged. A person may hope for confidence, success, or stability while repeating behaviors that prevent them. Responsibility begins when they connect outcomes to actions honestly. They stop asking why things always happen and start asking how their decisions contribute. This shift removes helplessness. Instead of waiting for circumstances to improve, they adjust behavior. Even small adjustments restore influence. The individual feels empowered because progress depends on effort rather than luck. There is also a change in attitude toward problems. Without responsibility, problems feel unfair and overwhelming. With responsibility, problems become manageable tasks. The person separates what they can influence from what they cannot. They address the first and accept the second. This clarity reduces emotional exhaustion. They no longer fight every difficulty. They respond thoughtfully to those within their reach. Responsibility teaches foresight. When someone recognizes consequences belong partly to them, they begin thinking ahead. They plan more carefully and prepare earlier. Small preparations prevent larger difficulties. The future becomes less unpredictable because they contributed to its stability. Planning is no longer anxiety-driven, but purpose-driven. Another effect is reliability. Others learn they can depend on someone who accepts responsibility. Trust grows naturally. Opportunities appear because dependability is valuable. The person gains choices not by avoiding obligation, but by fulfilling it. Their reputation supports their freedom. Responsibility also changes self-perception. The person stops seeing themselves as reacting to life and begins seeing themselves as participating in it. This perspective increases motivation. Actions feel meaningful because they influence real outcomes. Motivation grows from ownership rather than external reward. There is emotional maturity in accepting consequences calmly. Instead of denying mistakes, they acknowledge them and correct them. This prevents repetition. Each lesson strengthens understanding. The person develops resilience because they trust their ability to respond constructively. Freedom from excuses appears as well. When someone owns their behavior, they stop explaining away delays or errors. Energy once spent justifying is spent improving. Life becomes simpler. They do not need to protect an image because growth matters more than appearance. Responsibility also protects relationships. Honest acknowledgement of actions reduces conflict. Apologies become sincere and change becomes visible. Others feel respected and cooperation improves. Harmony grows from accountability. The individual begins respecting time differently. Recognizing that time used poorly affects them directly, they manage it carefully. They prioritize what matters and reduce distractions. Productivity increases without force because purpose guides attention. There is also peace in preparation. Handling responsibilities early removes background worry. The person relaxes fully because nothing urgent remains undone. Rest becomes genuine rather than anxious. Responsibility, once feared, becomes the source of calm. Confidence strengthens as responsibilities are handled successfully. Each completed task confirms capability. The person trusts their ability to face larger challenges. Courage appears naturally because they have practiced reliability. Responsibility expands independence. The person depends less on external approval. They measure progress by personal standards rather than comparison. This independence reduces pressure and increases satisfaction. Over time, responsibility becomes identity. The individual no longer sees it as effort but as normal behavior. They act thoughtfully by habit. Life feels organized and intentional. In the end, responsibility does not confine a person. It clarifies their path. By accepting ownership of choices and consequences, they gain control over direction. Freedom emerges from knowing their actions matter and using that influence wisely. Chapter 10. Becoming a person who finishes things. Many people begin projects with enthusiasm, but quietly abandon them when the initial excitement fades. The beginning feels inspiring because it contains possibility. The end feels demanding because it requires persistence. Finishing becomes rare not because tasks are too difficult, but because the mind prefers starting over enduring. Starting offers emotional reward immediately. Finishing requires effort without immediate recognition. A person who finishes things learns to value completion more than novelty. They understand progress is measured not by how often they begin, but by how often they follow through. This shift changes their life direction. Each completed task builds confidence and order, while unfinished work accumulates mental weight and quiet frustration. Unfinished tasks occupy attention long after they are postponed. The mind remembers them and returns repeatedly to the thought of what remains undone. Even during rest, they create subtle tension. The person feels busy without moving forward. Completing even a small task releases this tension. The relief is not only practical but psychological. The brain experiences closure. Closure strengthens clarity and energy because attention is no longer divided between intention and avoidance. Becoming someone who finishes things starts with small commitments. Large promises often fail because they rely on motivation. Small commitments succeed because they rely on consistency. Finishing a brief daily task teaches the brain that action leads to completion. The mind then expects follow-through in larger efforts. Confidence grows gradually from repeated proof. There is an important moment in every project when interest declines. The work becomes repetitive or difficult. This stage determines identity. If the person stops here, they reinforce the habit of abandonment. If they continue, they build resilience. The project matters less than the behavior. Persistence trains the mind to continue despite reduced excitement. Perfectionism often prevents finishing. A person delays completion because the result feels imperfect. They revise endlessly, believing more time will produce flawless work. In reality, improvement often comes from finishing and learning, not from waiting. Completion provides feedback. Feedback guides growth. By accepting imperfect endings, they allow progress to continue. Finishing also strengthens self-trust. Each completed responsibility becomes evidence of reliability. The person begins believing their own plans. They set goals with confidence because they expect follow-through. Without completion, plans feel uncertain. With completion, plans feel real. Another effect appears in discipline. Starting requires motivation. Finishing requires structure. The person learns to work even when enthusiasm is gone. They understand effort matters more during ordinary moments than during inspired ones. This understanding stabilizes productivity. There is also emotional reward. Completion creates satisfaction deeper than temporary excitement. The person feels capable and organized. This satisfaction motivates future effort naturally. They no longer chase novelty, they appreciate continuity. Finishing tasks improves time management. Unfinished work accumulates and creates pressure. Completed work creates space. The individual experiences calm because responsibilities are handled. This calm supports focus for new projects. Others notice reliability as well. A person who consistently completes work earns trust. Opportunities increase because dependability is valued. Their reputation grows quietly. Finishing becomes a practical advantage in relationships and career. Finishing changes mindset toward difficulty. Instead of avoiding challenges, the person approaches them steadily. They know persistence leads to completion. Fear decreases because they experienced success through endurance before. There is also personal order. Completing tasks regularly organizes daily life. The environment reflects stability. Clutter decreases because responsibilities are addressed promptly. Order outside mirrors order inside. Eventually, the habit becomes natural. The person no longer debates whether to finish. They expect themselves to continue until completion. This expectation simplifies decision-making. Starting and finishing become connected. Confidence expands beyond work. The individual trusts themselves in commitments, relationships, and goals. They feel stable because their actions are dependable. Others rely on them, and they rely on themselves. In the end, becoming a person who finishes things is less about productivity and more about identity. Each completion reinforces reliability. The person learns they can carry effort through discomfort to resolution. Through repeated follow-through, discipline becomes part of character, and progress becomes steady rather than temporary. Finishing a task is rarely about the last step alone. It is about staying present through the middle, where excitement disappears and effort feels ordinary. Many people enjoy beginnings because beginnings contain imagination. The middle contains repetition, and repetition feels less rewarding. Yet the middle is where real change occurs. A person who learns to continue during this stage trains patience. They stop relying on emotional momentum and start relying on steady attention. By remaining consistent through ordinary effort, they build a deeper form of discipline. Completion becomes natural because continuation became normal. There is often a quiet resistance that appears close to the end of a project. The mind suggests delaying the final effort, convincing the person they need more preparation or a better moment. This delay seems harmless, but it interrupts closure. Without closure, the brain keeps the task active in memory. The individual feels distracted because part of their attention remains unfinished. By completing even small final steps immediately, they restore focus. Closure clears mental space and improves concentration for new goals. Finishing teaches responsibility toward promises. Every commitment made to oneself carries meaning. When the person consistently follows through, they reinforce self-respect. They stop doubting their plans because they have proven reliability repeatedly. This internal trust reduces hesitation. They begin goals confidently because experience confirms they can carry effort through difficulty. Another change occurs in motivation. People who finish tasks do not depend on strong inspiration. They act during neutral moods as well as energetic ones. This steadiness protects progress. They understand motivation may begin a project, but will not carry it alone. Continuation depends on routine and decision rather than excitement. Completion also builds resilience. While working toward an end, obstacles appear. Instead of abandoning effort, the person adjusts strategy and continues. Each obstacle overcome becomes evidence of capability. Fear decreases because challenges no longer seem permanent. The individual learns they can endure temporary difficulty to reach resolution. Finishing improves learning. Unfinished efforts rarely provide full understanding. Only by reaching the end does the person see what worked and what did not. This reflection refines skill. Without completion, mistakes repeat. With completion, knowledge grows steadily. There is emotional relief in completion. The mind relaxes when responsibilities are fulfilled. The person experiences calm not from avoidance but from accomplishment. This calm supports confidence and creativity. They approach future tasks with less anxiety. Another effect is improved organization. Someone who finishes regularly handles responsibilities promptly. Tasks no longer accumulate into overwhelming lists. Life feels manageable because work is distributed over time instead of postponed. Order develops naturally from follow-through. Finishing also strengthens patience with progress. The individual recognizes meaningful results require sustained effort. They stop seeking instant outcomes and accept gradual development. This patience prevents discouragement and protects consistency. Relationships benefit as well. Others trust individuals who complete commitments. Reliability builds respect. Opportunities increase because dependability is valued more than talent alone. Finishing becomes a social advantage as well as a personal one. Completion changes perception of effort. Instead of viewing effort as a burden, the person sees it as a path to clarity. Each finished task brings resolution and learning. Effort becomes purposeful rather than tiring. There is also a shift in attention. The person focuses on process instead of distraction. They recognize unfinished work consumes mental energy. By completing tasks promptly, they free attention for meaningful activities. Over time, persistence becomes identity. The individual sees themselves as someone who continues until resolution. This belief influences future behavior. They begin difficult projects confidently because they trust their endurance. Confidence expands beyond tasks. The person feels capable in decisions and responsibilities. They rely on themselves during uncertainty because they experienced follow-through repeatedly. Stability grows from consistency. In the end, finishing things creates a reliable life. Through repeated completion, the individual gains clarity, calm, and direction. They no longer measure progress by intention but by resolution. By continuing past comfort and through repetition, they become someone whose actions consistently reach conclusion and their future becomes steady rather than uncertain. Completion often requires facing the quiet moment when a person wants to stop simply because the work feels ordinary. There is no excitement left, no external praise, and no immediate reward. At this stage, many people unconsciously search for a new beginning just to escape the steady effort. Yet this is precisely the moment where identity forms. Continuing when nothing feels special trains the mind to value commitment over emotion. The person learns they are not guided only by feeling, but by decision. This realization strengthens inner stability because behavior becomes dependable regardless of mood. Unfinished work quietly drains attention. Even when the person is doing something else, part of their mind returns to what remains undone. They replay the task mentally, thinking about starting again later. This mental repetition consumes energy. Completion releases that energy. The brain stops holding the task open and focus becomes clearer. Many people feel tired not from effort but from carrying many incomplete intentions at once. Finishing restores mental space. There is also an important psychological shift in how effort is perceived. When someone repeatedly stops halfway, they begin associating effort with frustration. They remember difficulty but never experience resolution. When they finish, they experience closure. Closure creates satisfaction that balances the effort. The mind then associates work with relief rather than burden. This change encourages future persistence. Finishing teaches patience with imperfection. A completed imperfect task often provides more growth than an unfinished perfect idea. The person learns improvement occurs through repetition and reflection, not waiting for flawless performance. Each finished attempt becomes a step forward. Without finishing, learning pauses. With finishing, understanding develops continuously. Another effect appears in time awareness. A person who completes tasks notices how steady effort accumulates. They stop underestimating small actions. They recognize progress comes from daily attention rather than rare intensity. This awareness changes planning. They choose consistency instead of bursts of effort followed by long pauses. Completion also influences motivation differently. Instead of needing excitement to begin, the person gains energy from finishing. Each completed task encourages the next. Momentum forms naturally. The satisfaction of closure becomes a reliable source of encouragement. There is confidence in reliability. When the individual consistently finishes responsibilities, they trust their commitments. They promise carefully and act consistently. This alignment strengthens self-respect. They no longer fear their own plans because they expect follow-through. Finishing also reduces avoidance. The mind stops exaggerating difficulty because experience proves tasks can end successfully. Fear decreases with repetition. The person approaches challenges calmly because they have resolved many before. Relationships improve through completion as well. Others depend on someone who finishes what they begin. Trust deepens because expectations are met. Cooperation becomes easier. Reliability creates respect without effort. Another benefit is emotional calm. Incomplete work creates background worry. Completed work creates peace. The person relaxes fully because responsibilities are addressed. Rest becomes restorative rather than uneasy. Completion encourages better decision-making. The person understands starting requires readiness to continue. They choose commitments thoughtfully. This prevents overload and increases success rate. Thoughtful beginnings support consistent endings. There is also pride in perseverance. Finishing a difficult task provides evidence of endurance. The person sees themselves as capable of sustained effort. This belief influences future goals. They aim higher because they trust persistence. The habit of finishing simplifies life. Fewer unfinished projects mean fewer distractions. Attention becomes focused. Energy becomes purposeful. The individual spends more time progressing and less time restarting. Over time, finishing becomes automatic. The person feels uncomfortable leaving tasks incomplete. They naturally continue until resolution. Completion feels normal rather than exceptional. Discipline becomes part of character. In the end, the ability to finish transforms direction. Each completed action strengthens confidence, clarity, and stability. The individual moves from intention to resolution consistently. Through repeated follow-through, they shape a life defined not by ideas alone, but by completed effort and dependable action. Excuses always sound reasonable in the moment. They promise relief, more time, or a better mood later. But slowly, they create a pattern where intentions stop leading to action. Discipline is not harshness toward yourself. It is a decision to stop waiting for the perfect feeling before doing what you already know matters. The mind may resist at first, but every small completed action begins to rebuild trust within yourself. You do not change your life in one dramatic day. You change it through repeated choices that feel small but remain consistent. Each time you act despite hesitation, you teach your brain that your decisions are real. Over time, effort becomes normal and delay becomes uncomfortable. Discipline then stops feeling like force and starts feeling like stability. When excuses lose their influence, your direction becomes clear, and progress finally becomes natural.